In Chapter 5, we're looking at adolescent cognitive development, which basically means thought processes and intelligence. When discussing cognitive development, we always have to look at Piaget. Piaget believed that we develop through 4 stages: sensory motor, preoperational, concrete, formal. In sensory motor, infants basically learn using their senses. They use simple motor activities and sensory exploration. And preoperational thought, preschoolers basically are learning language, they're using symbolic play, they're egocentric in their thinking, they only see the world from their viewpoint. And they use animism, which is where they give human-like emotions to inanimate objects. In concrete operational thought, we are school age and now we're thinking logically. We think concrete but not abstract. We can understand conservation problems. And then finally, in formal operational thought, we've now mastered formal reasoning and we can think abstractly. This is where adolescents have progressed to, according to Piaget. 5 aspects of formal operational thinking. Introspection, thinking about thought. Adolescents are able to think about their own thoughts. Abstract thinking, going beyond the tangible. Combinatorial thinking, being able to consider all important facts and ideas. Logical reasoning, the ability to form correct conclusions using induction and deduction. And hypothetical reasoning, formulating hypotheses and examining the evidence for them, considering numerous variables. Effects of adolescent thought on their personality and behavior. Adolescents tend to be very idealistic. They have the ability to think reflectively and critically. They also engage in moral reasoning and make moral judgments about people and actions. This leads them to be very idealistic about the world around them. This may be exhibited through their criticism of others, especially of adults. Hypocrisy. This stems from the fact that they can form opinions or theories about what they consider to be ideal, but have a hard time putting those opinions or theories into practice. This can also take the form of adolescents pretending to be what they are not. This occurs through a mismatch between what is expected and seen as correct and what actually occurs. Their newly achieved capacity to envision what should be enables them to go beyond their real selves and to pretend to be what others actually expect them to be. Pseudo-stupidity is the tendency to approach problems at much too complex level and fail, not because the tasks are difficult, but actually because they are quite simple. This comes from the capacity to consider alternatives. There is difficulty managing this ability in a way that allows for effective and efficient decision making. Egocentrism, if you remember back when we were talking about Piaget's stages, preschoolers are egocentric in the pre-operational stage. Well, adolescents come back to this egocentrism. Adolescents feel that they have an imaginary audience that is always watching and judging them. They have a hard time seeing that they are actually not the center of attention. They deal with this in many ways, such as acting out, conforming, and desiring privacy. Adolescents also tend to have personal fables, which are beliefs in the uniqueness of their own experiences. This gives them a sense of immortality and invulnerability. Bad things are only going to happen to someone else. Introspection. Adolescents spend much time in introspection due to this combination of egocentrism, imaginary audience, personal fable, as well as a greater capacity for reflective and critical thinking. This means they think about their own thinking and often reenact interactions with others and critically analyze their own behaviors. Information processing is another cognitive approach. They study how individuals perceive, attend to, retrieve, and manipulate information. They actually compare human thinking to that of the computer. What are the steps in information processing? First, a stimulus must be perceivable. Then a person has to selectively pay attention to the stimulus. The individual makes judgments and appraisals, and then the information can be stored in our short-term and long-term memory. Adolescents begin to use elimination strategies, which is looking for evidence that actually disproves a hypothesis, as opposed to what younger children do, which is confirmation strategy, looking only for examples that match a hypothesis. Self-serving bias happens when we accept information more easily if it's actually consistent with our own opinion. What is the definition of decision making? Well, decision making is our ability to choose between alternatives. Adolescents who are good decision makers have better social, emotional, and academic outcomes. There are 5 key skills that underline decision making abilities: identifying your alternative courses of action, identifying the appropriate criteria for considering alternatives, assessing the alternatives by the criteria, summarizing information about alternatives, and then evaluating the outcome of the decision-making process. Barriers to good decision-making. Often poor decisions are made because we stick too closely to heuristics or rules of thumb when making decisions. For example, the sunk cost fallacy is when people do more of a disliked activity if they paid for it than if it were free. Have you ever sat through a movie that you hated simply because you paid for it? Why not just get up? Logical fallacies occur when we neglect to consider the usual frequency to which something occurs. Risky decision making. Adolescents are more likely to engage in risky behaviors than adults. These tendencies are not correlated with risk perception. Rather, adolescents appear to be focusing on the benefits they will get from the actions instead of the risk. The neurological perspective asserts that cognitive gains are the result of brain development during adolescence, not just the result of experience. The brain continues to develop during adolescence. Particularly the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe all develop and contribute to improvements in spatial reasoning, impulse control, and language. The hippocampus is involved in learning, memory, and motivation. The cerebrum is the largest structure in the brain. Now look at intelligence, assessing cognition. What exactly is intelligence? Where there are various theories on what intelligence is. The theory that there is one intelligence actually gives the idea that G is the concept of a general intelligence, a single ability that underlines most thinking. There's also the idea of fluid and crystallized intelligence, which indicates that intelligence can be fluid, basic perceptual and cognitive processes, in addition to crystallized, which is the knowledge of specific information. The triarchic theory of intelligence says that there's actually 3 parts to intelligence: analytic, creative, and practical. Analytic being what we typically consider when we look at intelligence, analysis, and evaluation, but also we should look at creativity, thinking outside of the box, also application, being able to actually use what you know. Many of us would call this common sense. And then there's Gardner. Gardner is a person who believed in multiple intelligences or frames of mind, and actually believes that we have at least 7 different types of intelligence: linguistic, logical, mathematical, musical, spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and naturalistic. Then it comes to the discussion of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, sometimes called EQ, is being able to accurately perceive another person's emotions by monitoring their facial expressions, tone of voice, and body posture. You can also sensibly use emotions to guide attention and cognition. You can appropriately interpret the cause of others' emotions, and very importantly, manage your own emotions. Intelligence testing. IQ tests aim to measure intelligence. Achievement tests, on the other hand, aim to measure mastery of a subject. Well-known intelligence tests are the Stanford-Binet and the Wechsler. IQ scores typically fall in this scale. A person with over 130 IQ score would be considered gifted or genius. A score of about 115 up to 130 would be considered above average. 85 to about 115 would be considered average. 70 up to 85 would be below average. And below 70 is where we start to look at intellectual disability.